Have you ever felt like you missed your chance at a comfortable retirement? Well, Jackie Cummings Koski is living proof that you haven't. At age 36, she was a divorced single mom with just $20,000 or so in retirement savings. Just 10 years later, she was a millionaire who retired early. An utterly incredible turnaround story. We're going to find out how she did it, and perhaps how you can too. You're watching Inside Investing. Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of Inside Investing, the show that helps you level up your financial knowledge and sharpen your investing skills. Presented by TD Direct Investing, named Canada's best online brokerage by the Globe and Mail for 3 straight years and counting. I'm your host, Rob Moise, and I am so excited to bring you today's conversation. This is one of the most inspiring investing stories I've ever heard, and I love how it underscores just how powerful investing can be to help you reach your life goals, even if you get a late start. Joining us is financial literacy advocate Jackie Cummings Koski. She's the author of the books Fire for Dummies and Money Letters to My Daughter, and she also co-hosts the podcast Catching Up to Fi, which has over 1 million downloads. Jackie, it's an honor to have you with us. Like I said, I absolutely love your story, so inspiring. But before we get into that, I actually want to talk about today and what today looks like for you. One of the things I've heard about retirees, particularly early retirees, is that it's important to retire to something rather than from something. And so I'm curious, now that you don't really have to worry about money so much, where are you finding purpose? What's driving you these days?
Yeah, for me, one of the things that have always been very important to me is financial literacy and education. And I grew up pretty poor. I didn't have access to financial education. You don't know what you don't know. And when I started learning about money, boy, did the switch turn on. And it made all the difference for me. So my mission, and when I retired early, was to focus on financial literacy and education. That was at the center of everything. And I want to do that on a one-to-many basis. So that's the book, that's the podcast, that's talking to you today. So that was just one of my main goals, and that was pulling me towards that mission versus what I was doing. And it is just critical to be going to something, because otherwise it's not going to last. Like, you're shifting your norm like crazy. And I'm just so glad I had that focus. And that was like one of the things that gave me a lot of motivation to actually make the transition.
Yeah, I mean, once you get through the honey-do list in that first year of retirement, you're like, okay, what do I do with myself now here? I think it's amazing how you're giving back and trying to help other people reach this incredible milestone that you did too. I'm curious, just living in financial independence right now, is there anything that surprised you that you weren't expecting as you pursued it?
Well, now that I reached it, I guess, one, I realized that the money part wasn't the goal. It was the money was like an obstacle that was keeping me from doing the things I really wanted to do. So I guess, one of my biggest surprises was that, perfection is not required. So I didn't have to have everything perfect. I made mistakes, and my mistakes were not catastrophic, where it threw everything off kilter. So I'm just glad that I realized it didn't have to be so precise. So I guess precision is not required was probably the biggest thing that I learned.
Just knowing that you have to be directionally correct when you're pursuing FIRE, not with the details. Although I know you're a big spreadsheet user. I know you like to nail down everything.
I do. I'm a big spreadsheet user, so you're right. And I dug into those spreadsheets a lot more before I reached FIRE versus after. And so it is important to be directionally correct. Like, you can't, take on a ton of debt and not watch your expenses and not invest. No, but you have to be going in that direction. Are you increasing your savings rate? Are you cutting down on your expenses? Are you, moving towards increasing your total net worth and working towards your FIRE number or increasing your net worth? So things like that, just move in the right direction.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about some of those habits and decisions that you made that got you to where you are today. But maybe the $1 million question, pun fully intended for you here. Do you think it's ever too late to catch up to financial independence?
Yeah, I think a lot of people think that it is. And it's not even just based on age, because you've got some 30-year-olds that think they're getting a late start. I was in my 30s. And you've got some 50-year-olds that think they're getting a late start. I say that it's never too late. and you can always make improvements. Will you be able to retire early? I don't know. Will you reach financial independence in the time frame that you want to? I don't know. But no matter what, you can improve your financial situation. And possibly, if you've got younger people around you, like kids or grandkids, or even people in the community, what you're doing could very well influence them. So you are still working towards the greater good to improve your own situation and possibly others.
Look at that. You're always thinking about others. I love it, Jackie. Fantastic stuff here. But let's talk about you and this incredible journey that you had to financial freedom and some of the tips you have for other late starters here. For those in our audience, if you want to get in on the conversation, we'd love to have you. Make sure you submit your questions for Jackie to us here. If you're watching on Webbroker, you can use the chat box to send those questions to us. If you're watching on our broadcast platform, check out the questions and comments box on the right side of your screen. And if you're watching on our YouTube live stream, there's a link in the description that will hop you over to the broadcast platform, and that's where you can ask your questions. All right, Jackie, let's start at the beginning of your journey to financial independence, or FIRE, let's say. And it begins at a crisis moment in your personal life, which was your divorce. How did this kickstart your journey to FIRE?
Yeah, it was a tough time. And, Rob, this happens to a lot of people where something happened that somehow was the igniter of you changing the way that you did things. So for me, it was at the time of my divorce. I was married for 11 years. And when we started looking at the numbers at the time of my divorce, I had significantly less in my retirement account than my spouse. I had $20,000. He had $120,000. I felt very financially ignorant. And at the end of the day, after I refocused, took about 2 years, but I said, you know what, I never want to feel this financially ignorant again. And not to mention, I grew up very poor. So in my head, I'm like, I don't want to ever go back to being in poverty. It doesn't feel good. And I never wanted my daughter to feel poverty the way that I did. So those were the motivators that woke me up and said, I need to do something different. And I started asking myself some questions on what could I do, including things that I actually enjoyed. And part of that was I was always scared of the stock market and I wanted to learn about it. So part of getting over that ignorance phase and not knowing was turning on my learning dial and just going from there.
I mean, to have to start a journey like that at 36 years old, I mean, I'm 36 years old today, and I'm trying to put myself in your shoes back then. I think I would be freaking out, frankly. I mean, because $20,000 is not nothing, but it's not a lot. And to have to rebuild everything, it's really tough. And I just wonder, from a mental point of view, how did you overcome those feelings of despair? Like, it's too late, it's over, like, I'm never going to be able to reach my retirement goals. Like, how did you fight against that?
Rob, I felt all of those. For me, it took about 2 years. So it didn't happen overnight. And I went through the, feeling down on myself and, being anxious and feeling like this is overwhelming and how can I possibly get over this? But after a couple of years, I took the time to kind of work on myself and mentally get my head together because nothing was going to happen until in my head, I knew that I could do something different. And after those 2 years, like I said, I asked myself, okay, how am I going to get out of this? How am I going to do something different? And so I guess I just gave myself a little grace. I took the time that it needed to refocus. And, after the divorce is all said and done, the funds were equalized. So I guess that was helpful. It was still not that much for the age that I was at, but it was helpful, and it helped me get on the other side to say, okay, I'm ready to start actually taking action and doing something.
And you mentioned that you grew up in poverty, so that's obviously a big motivator. Don't want to end back up in there. I know you've talked before about your father and the influence he had on your life. Single dad, raised 6 kids.
Yeah.
Was there anything about that experience in childhood that helped, you think, maybe prep you to take on this big challenge?
Yeah, my dad has always been and will always be my greatest hero. He wasn't wealthy, wasn't rich, but he put food on the table every day, worked a full-time job in a factory, always worked a part-time job. And so I believe that, the way to leave a legacy is not just financial. So I'm so glad that I inherited his incredible work ethic. He taught me that, and not just from sitting down and telling me, but these are things that I saw him do, his actions. He was debt averse. So as I was getting older, graduating from college and all of that, I didn't have a lot of the debt that a lot of my friends had. So I learned so much from him, his ethics. Those things helped me throughout my life. And maybe that's why I kind of have a propensity to want to help other people. But those were critical characteristics and things that I inherited from my dad that I do believe helped me with some really good habits as I started learning about money and getting on the right track with understanding my finances.
Okay, so he set you up with the foundation here. You're looking to rebuild your financial life here. What were some of those first steps that you took to become financially literate and start catching up to financial independence?
Yeah, so I think I got started in kind of an odd way, Rob. So one of the things I mentioned that I was very interested in, I was interested in the stock market because nobody around me invested. I was afraid of it. So I'm like, okay, what can I do? I happened to be on the phone talking to a friend of mine in another state. And we were talking about stocks for some reason. I barely knew what I was doing, but she mentioned a nonprofit organization and they support investment clubs. So I found an investment club in my area, joined that investment club. And it was really cool because these people knew what they were talking about. They were all smarter than me. And more than anything, with my experience with them, I spent the next 12 years being a part of that investment club and learning about investing and stocks and compound growth. So my big takeaway was these broad ideas of you can't save your way to wealth. You have to invest. You have to invest in the stock market. Compound growth is a powerful thing. So I backtracked and I said, okay, why am I not maxing out some of my other investing accounts besides what I was doing with the club? So I started going back and maxing out my employer-sponsored retirement plan. I started maxing out something called a Roth IRA in the U.S. There's a health savings plan that I can invest in, and then other investments. So it helped me overcome that fear of investing, being around these smart, supportive people that were so open and willing to share what they knew. So that was game changing for me.
Yeah, I mean, to have that community backstopping you in a way is really powerful stuff here. And I mean, to go from having $20,000 or so in retirement savings, I mean, a little bit more after the divorce settlement here, to then going and maxing out all your, tax advantaged accounts here and stuff like that. I mean, that seems like a really big jump here. And you reached your FIRE number within a decade. I mean, like 10 years is a long time. It's not that long of a time, Jackie. I think a lot of people might wonder, what were you investing in that helped you reach FIRE so quickly? Like, were you like YOLOing on penny stocks or like tech stuff or something like that? Like, what was it? What's the secret to your success here?
Yeah, well, it wasn't anything magical and it wasn't anything secret. Everything was publicly available. I didn't work for a tech startup. I didn't, invest in the FANG stocks or anything like that. It was more steady. And the thing I do like to point out is that even though I only had $20,000 in my retirement account at the time of my divorce or before my divorce, I was doing something. And I think I was doing the match or something like that. And in 2008, everything went down. So I was, part of that, having to see what I did save going down even more. But I stayed the course. I didn't do anything super fancy. I guess you could say one of the fanciest things I did, I do have an individual stock portfolio. I did with the club, and I probably always will. I'm a long-term investor. I like to invest in great companies. So I do have a individual stock portfolio. But other than that, I'm primarily just straight up low-cost index funds. And that is pretty much it. I have a little bit of a fixed income, of course, because I'm drawing out my portfolio. But I did not do anything that was earth-shattering. Probably the biggest thing was just understanding and not being afraid of the stock market because some people are very risk averse. And early on, I probably was too. So to go all in my retirement accounts and just knowing that long term this was going to do okay, it just started adding up. It started adding up really quickly.
I mean, I think that might turn a lot of heads to realize that something like a diversified index fund can be the vehicle that helps get you so far in your financial life here. I know I know you like your spreadsheets here. I'm going to put you on the spot, though. Do you remember roughly, like as you were starting out in those early years, how much you were putting away each month to max out your accounts?
Yeah, it was approximately so a little over $30,000 a year, so a little over around $3,000 a month. And this was just again, this is how it added up when I looked at all the investment accounts I was putting money in. You know, my retirement account at work, my individual retirement account, my health savings account, and then a little bit of money in the brokerage account. So it was roughly about $3,000 a month. And the thing, Rob, I didn't feel like I deprived myself. I get asked a lot, you know, you must have really had to cut back. Well, not so much. You know, when I'm not the greatest budgeter. So when I sat down to figure out what I was spending every month or every year, I had to back into it. So I took my gross income and I took out taxes. I took out what I was investing, and whatever was left, that was pretty much my budget and what I was comfortably living off of. So it didn't take any real cutting or anything like that. I don't know if it's from growing up poor. I was always very mindful of how I spent my money and was pretty wise with that. But yeah, that's how it ended up.
I mean, I think a lot of people, we showed a chart up there of your budget breakdown here. And I think a lot of people might look at some things in there going like, a mortgage at $1,200, like, boy, that would be nice, coming from people who live in Toronto and stuff like that. Obviously, that was part of the equation here, but the fact that you were able to live the life you were living anyway and still max out your accounts is pretty powerful stuff. Do you think that there's some, tip or some secret to keeping your expenses so low, other than, living in a low-cost area?
Yeah, I'm an advocate of people enjoying the journey and not cutting out all of the fun. So, because if you try to cut out all the fun things, you are not going to stick with it. And I firmly believe that if I was doing that to myself, I would have gone off course really, really quickly. But to me, everybody has a superpower. Now, you can see that some of my expenses were pretty low, but I guess I'll point out some things that I don't have in my expenses that really made a difference. Back to my dad that taught me to be debt averse and that debt was not a good thing. I didn't have a car loan. I didn't have crazy student loans. I didn't have a high mortgage payment. We saw that. And I didn't have credit card debt. So a lot of people will spend most of their lives with debt on these things. So for my expenses to be so low, a big part of it was that I didn't have a big line item for debt. And even though some of my expenses were really low, I'm in a low cost of living area, which means wages were fairly low too. In the U.S., I was making about $80,000 a year. That's considered sort of middle income. So for me, it wasn't a super large income. I just learned to be wiser with the money that I had versus, trying to make more money. And of course, that's an option as well. If you struggle with the expenses, on the other side of that, you can increase your income, which I don't think I did a super job of that, but I did more with the money that I had.
Listen, I think it's really, again, powerful and inspiring to know that, okay, you don't have to be a CEO making like a 7-figure income here or something like that. And you also don't have to eat ramen noodle packets for the rest of your days here to make this happen, right? So being somewhere in that middle road and just kind of staying the course, it sounds like consistency was really the key for you here.
Yeah, no ramen noodle for me. But yes, consistency is an important thing. And the only way you can be consistent is if you're enjoying what you're doing and you stick with it. That's why these ideas of live on beans and rice and cut everything to the bone is simply not sustainable for most people. And I know for sure it wouldn't have been sustainable for me. So if I did that, maybe I would have retired a couple years sooner, but it didn't matter. I wanted to enjoy the journey. I had a daughter. I wanted to make sure she was, off on her own before I ever thought about retiring. That was important to me. So yeah, enjoy the journey. Who cares if you end up, maybe working a year or two longer, or at least shifting to maybe you move into something you do enjoy more if you hate your job, because unfortunately there's some people that might be in a toxic workplace where they do need the shift, but they don't necessarily have to retire or stay at that job. There's something in the middle.
One of the things I find really interesting about your story here too is it comes down partly to a matter of timing here, because you started investing really meaningfully at the depths of the great financial crisis, which turned out to be fantastic timing, right? You're basically buying everything on discounts, and then we had a 15-year plus bull market here or what have you. The market today, obviously in a much different place. It's much pricier. Do you think someone starting today could take the approach that you did and still reach financial independence as quickly as you did? Or would they have to try to pursue some other kind of beat the market strategy, taking on a lot of risk, something like that?
Well, I would say, yes, you can. And let me tell you why. So I'm no genius over here. So I had no idea that 2008 was going to be such a good year to start investing. But I did. OK, we went on to have a very strong bull market. But who's to say when those, I just don't think that was a one in a lifetime opportunity. The market goes up, the market goes down. But I stayed consistent the whole time, like you mentioned. So from 2008 on, I started, but I was contributing, mostly from my employer-sponsored retirement plan. I was making contributions every year. 2009, 2010, 2011. So I was consistent. So even as the market was going up, I was still putting money in. I didn't take the money and run. Now, I definitely think it was wind at my back that helped me out quite a bit, but I had no idea in the early days. I had no idea how to figure out my net worth and my FIRE number and all that. That came later. So today, think about 2022. That was a pretty big down year. And then even if the market's up, it can do two things. It can go down or can continue to go up. And the market always go up long term. So I had a long term thought process. So can someone do that today? They absolutely can. They maybe even have better tools than me. Maybe they make more money than I did. Maybe they do decide to do something a little bit different in their portfolio. But it is absolutely doable. And what would the alternative be? Do nothing? Or to go after, crazy things that are super risky? Well, it depends on what your risk tolerance is and if you're willing to take the downside of doing things or investing in things that are a little bit risky. So that's my explanation to why I think it's absolutely doable, and it is never too late to start. And even if the best day was yesterday, the next best day is today.
Yeah, I've heard that one before, and it's a fantastic message, too. It's keep your nose to the grindstone, control the things that you can control. And to your point about taking on a lot of risk, if you do something that doesn't really make you comfortable in a lot of ways, you're less likely to have that consistency and stick to plan, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. You're just not going to stick with something that you're uncomfortable doing.
Jackie, too, and we just showed a chart up on screen there. Your net worth has actually grown in the time since you've retired early, which is just incredible to me. What do you attribute to that to?
Oh gosh, it's incredible to me, Rob, because I have been withdrawing from my portfolio. Now, I've been retired for about 5.5 years, and every year has been a little bit different. I do a few things that bring in an income, but not even close enough to what it costs me to live. My expenses are between like $40,000 and $45,000 a year. Now, even though I've been taking money out, the money that's in there is still growing at a faster pace that's faster than inflation and faster than my withdrawal rate. There was only 1 year that I didn't have to take money out, but every other year I did have to take money out. And I track it only annually now. I mean, when I was working towards FIRE, I was checking it every single month. But I just checked it in July just for you, Rob. But yeah, so when I retired, my net worth was $1.3 million. And that was in December 2019. And so at this point, July 2025, it's nearly doubled to $2.1 million. And that's with taking withdrawals out of my account. And when I was doing the math in terms of when I could retire, I didn't even include Social Security, which is a system, in the U.S. where any workers, they pay into the system. And when they get older, starting at about 62, you can start to take monthly payments that continue for the rest of your life, guaranteed and adjusted for inflation. Not a bad deal, but I didn't even include that in my numbers.
It's just a fantastic story. And yes, certainly you do have these other supports in place there when you need it a little bit later in retirement here. Same thing here in Canada. So it's good to know that it doesn't all fall on your portfolio necessarily. But again, the fact that your net worth has continued to grow, I mean, congratulations, Jackie. It's a fantastic milestone here. We got a lot more to get to here, but I have a quick question for our viewers. Are you enjoying the show so far? Because if you are, check TD Direct Investing out on social media. We're on YouTube, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook. You can get a sneak peek at upcoming episodes we've got here on our live programming, as well as a ton of other content designed to help build your investing knowledge. Okay, Jackie, back to the conversation here, and I just want to try to pick apart some lessons that you might have for other late starters to the FIRE movement who maybe thought at first it's out of reach for them. Now you've got them thinking otherwise, maybe. So do you think that there's something, just a level set here, things about their finances that they would need to understand in order to start pursuing something like an early retirement?
Absolutely, Rob. I think the biggest thing, the most critical thing is the mental aspect, the psychological aspect around your money. You have to, like for me, it took 2 years after my divorce to really get to the point where I was willing to take action. So please don't underestimate the psychological part of this whole money thing. Nothing's happening unless you get your mind right. Now, once you do that, you really have to know where you're starting. Like, do you know your numbers? For instance, your income. Okay, so do you know what your gross salary is? Do you know what your take home is? Do you know what you're paying in taxes? So being aware of those things can now put you in a position to actually see what the problem is. Like if you're a high income earner, your problem might not be income. It might be looking at your expenses. Are you wasting money in areas that don't really matter to you? Is there other things you can do to increase your income? And I love to also focus on people that might be starting at a low income. Ask yourself the question, is this a permanent state? Typically, it's not. You could go back and go back to college, get a degree, or you can get a skill, or there's so many things you can do that will take you out of that low income mode. But those would be the early things that I think will make a difference because we're hard on ourselves. And I always say, give yourself a little grace to say this tough stuff is not taught in school or it hasn't been in the past. That's starting to change. Or you weren't in an environment where people talked about these things and you don't know what you don't know. Acknowledge that, let it sink in, process it however you need to, and then start saying, okay, I need to know where I'm starting because that's the only way you can, determine what areas you really need to work on most. And you probably have some superpowers in there too.
Okay, so we know what's coming in and coming out. That's like, we got to have that understood here. What about, right. I know for me, like I always try to pursue things. It's easier when you have a goal in mind, right? You have a number to strive for. How did you know what that number was, that magic number, the FIRE number was going to be that you needed to reach that you could then work towards?
Okay, so the widely known number, which I want it to be even more widely known, is your FI number, your financial independence number. And this is a point at which you don't have to rely on a paycheck from a job. You can rely on your investments. That's 25 times your annual expenses. So for me, my annual expenses were roughly $40,000. 40,000 times 25 is $1 million. So that was my number. So this is sort of part of the 4% rule because on the back end, once I got to that $1 million, I do the math based on taking off 4% of my investments every year, adjusted for inflation. Now, some people think that number should be a little bit lower, like 3.5%, or higher, like 5%. I like the 4% rule because it is a starting point. Some people could be getting a fixed pension. Some people could be factoring in Social Security. So you got to start somewhere. So I started roughly with the 4% rule, and this is what my number was. And that's an important question because for the longest, I had no idea. I thought it was an age, everybody retires at 65. Okay, that's the retirement date. And I started over time seeing all these different things that says, you know what, it doesn't have to be 62. Actually, it could be this number. So once you're over, the psychological stuff, you actually got to have some numbers to start working towards. And eventually you figure out that, again, the money sometimes is simply an obstacle you're moving out of the way. It's just a tool. It's not the actual goal. And that was the biggest thing that I learned. It freed me up to do the things I really loved, to work toward, my dreams and these big goals that I had. So yeah, that kind of says it.
I find it interesting that you're also sticking to the 4% rule, because a couple of weeks back we spoke with another early retiree about stress testing the 4% rule. Hey, I hear it's 5% rule now, says the creator. And he also said, listen, I'm not rushing to spend more money here. I want to take it easy. I've got a longer retirement in mind here. And it sounds like you're kind of in the similar boat there. One thing I wanted to ask you about too is asset allocation. Okay, obviously every investor is different here, but do you generally think that there's something that a late starter would want to consider, especially since they're trying to catch up to their retirement goals with less time? Is there like an all equity portfolio or something that they need to do? Can they go 60-40 or 70-30, something like that? What do you think? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a big debate on your allocation. You obviously need to be aware of your allocation and make it consistent with your risk tolerance and the time horizons you have in order to use that money. So I guess I like to put it in sort of a big picture type of thing, where stocks is going to get you more growth, but it is more risk. If you're close to retirement and the stock market's down, how are you going to feel? And are you okay with selling stocks when they're down? Most people will say no. So that means, what kind of safety do you have? If you're close to retirement, you need to free up some cash to be able to live off of. That's the reality of what I had to do. When I was ready for retirement, I had 3 years worth of annual expenses in cash. So are you comfortable with having all stocks with maybe a little bit in cash that will cover the next few years of what you need? Or do you want a bigger chunk to be safe? You hear things out there, 80-20, 80% stocks, 20% something safe like bonds. Some people say 70-30. And I don't really like that, rule of thumb, but it's a starting point. But I want you to think of it in those terms. If I need this money in the next 3 or 5 years, I should try to keep that portion relatively safe. Now, who knows what percent of your portfolio that will represent, but I guess I kind of like looking at a dollar figure versus a percent. I mean, you can figure that out on the back end. But for me, I was really looking at how many years of my annual expenses did I need to have available no matter what the stock market was doing.
One of the things that retirees obviously hate is uncertainty. Uncertainty, volatility, things that can shake up the plan. And We've had a little bit of that going on in the markets here with all these tariff wars and geopolitical events and wars and stuff going on. Is there any rules of thumb or things you like to do in moments like that help you stay on course and not bail out of your plan or derail the plan in some way?
Yeah, there are a few things I like to do. And let's just acknowledge that was a scary time. It doesn't matter how great of an investor you are. When the market's down in such a short period of time, like we saw back in April with U.S. stocks, it was scary. And you're allowed to feel that way. Now, some things that I always suggest that help me as well. Like, a lot of people will go into their retirement account and they'll look at whatever the default rate of return is, which is usually starts from the beginning of the year. Well, that wasn't looking so good. So I encourage people, look at longer time horizons. Look at the 3-year return. Look at the 5-year return or the 10-year return if you have it. That gives you a little bit of perspective and knowing a little bit of basic stock market history. Things like, if you go back 20 years and look at the U.S. stock market, probably most around the world as well, the market is up way more years than it's down. Over the last 20 years, the stock market has been down 3 times. The other 17 times, the stock market has been up. And if you go way back in history, it's roughly about 75% of the time the stock market is up versus down. So knowing a few things like that, it really helps puts things in perspective.
One of the best little turns of phrase I've heard with that in mind: when in doubt, zoom out. You can get that bigger perspective. One. There you go. That's not a Rob Moise original, so I don't want to take credit for it. But in any case, I think it's really helpful. It's a great thing to keep in mind, Jackie. Just a reminder to our audience, by the way, Q&A sessions right around the corner here. Make sure you get your questions into us. You can see how you can get your questions over to us on the screen there. We're going to have as much time as we can with Jackie and throw as much stuff as we can at her. Then that's coming up in just a moment. But before we get to that, Jackie, I want to throw some what we like to call investing hot takes at you. Okay, we've heard some interesting perspectives on the program in the past about investing, about retirement. I want to bounce some of those ideas off you, see if you agree, disagree, and why. How does that sound?
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Okay. Our first idea here comes from early retiree Kyle Prevost, and he shared a very unconventional investing strategy in retirement.
If you want the mathematically optimal approach to retirement, you should actually start with 50-60% in stocks and go up from there. When you look at the math of taking money out of a portfolio as it's going up and down in value, the most risky part is right at the beginning, because obviously losing 30% in year one stings a lot more than, oh, I'm in year 20 and my 1 million portfolio is now 1.5 million and I'm through the first however many years of retirement. Take less risk on day one of retirement, and then you can up the risk as you proceed through and give yourself a better chance of enjoying some really good stock market years.
So, Jackie, what do you think about this unconventional retirement strategy, this glide path towards 100% equities after you actually start with a lower equity share in those kind of vulnerable first few years of retirement?
Yeah, I think it's kind of unnecessary, but to be honest, there's a lot of strategies out there. And the key is once you pick your strategy, stick with it. I know that probably wouldn't have worked for me, knowing how stocks behave. But, to his point, in the early years, you do have to watch what happens. And for me, I did have to deal with that with COVID because I retired in December 2019. And then March of 2020, we had COVID and the market was down and like, oh, my God, I retired at the exact wrong time. So he's got some good points there, and there's certainly a strategy around sort of his ideas. And I guess I love that we don't all agree and we don't all think alike. But once you pick your strategy, try to stick with it. Do it mindfully. Do your research. Make sure it's going to fit with what you've got going on. But there's no one size fits all. But interesting take.
Yeah, full disclosure, Kyle himself doesn't pursue that, although he's done a ton of research into these things, and he thought it was a really interesting one that he brought up. But yeah, I think the maths, but to your point, you got to pick something that you can stick with, and it depends on what that is for you. Every investor is different here. Let's get to our next idea here. This one's from Veronica Papova from Vanguard, and she pushed back against this idea that we're seeing in some social media circles here, where you basically just buy an S&P 500 index ETF and you just consistently contribute to it. It's become really popular on social media, but she's not a big fan. Let's hear why.
Not only is it not diversified across many regions outside of the US, but it's also only invested in the stock market, only in equities. So it's assuming that whoever's investing in the VFE and chill strategy, they have a very high risk tolerance, that they can have a 100% equity portfolio. And that is why I don't think it's a savvy strategy. I think when you talk savvy strategies, you're combining different ETFs, different weightings to align with your goals and your risk tolerance.
Jackie, what do you think? Can you S&P 500 and chill your way to an early retirement, or is more diversification called for?
Actually, I think you can keep it just that simple. In the early days, I did start picking all these different small cap, large cap, mid cap, and I kept mixing like 5 or 6 different funds. And I just thought that complexity was unnecessary. I feel like when you stick with a simple low-cost index fund, mostly stocks typically, that it's one of the few things in your life that less is more. Now, if being diversified matters a lot to you over the returns, then certainly do that. You want a little bit of balance, but you don't need all these different, asset classes and sizes of stocks and things like that, because something like an S&P 500 index fund or total stock market index funds, it has a lot of diversification within there, even perhaps a lot of international, because a lot of these companies that's inside these funds, these stock index funds, they have huge international exposure. And most of their growth is probably internationally, where they have maxed out maybe in the US and Canada. So I just don't agree with that. And I think there's a lot of people that give up on investing and give up trying because they think it's too complex, and the industry has a tendency to make it that way. But I, as you saw in my portfolio, I've got, a growth stock index fund. That's the majority of what I have. And then I have a little bit of safety, and I have an individual stock portfolio. I'm not trying to make it any more complex than that. And I don't have to. My returns are fine. Maybe I could be more diversified, and who's to say what level of diversification is the right one?
Interesting. It's nice to hear some pushback against this idea. Some people are very pro, some people are very against. Interesting that to hear that perspective. Because Jackie, I know you got some letters after your name, right? You're a certified financial planner too, right? So it's interesting to hear you kind of give that perspective. So appreciate you playing along with this. But let's not have any further ado here. Let's get down to questions here. We've got them coming in fast and furious here in our live Q&A session. Michael's got a question for us here. Let's look at this one. Michael wants to know, is it 4% at any age? I thought one had to retire at 65 for that to work reliably. So Michael was referring to the 4% rule here. What are your thoughts, Jackie?
Well, really good point, Michael. The 4% rule, when that research was done by Bill Banyan, it did assume about a 30-year retirement. So if you have a longer time horizon, certainly it might need to be a smaller withdrawal rate. And that's why you hear the debate. Okay, 3.5%, 4%, 5%. If you have a longer time horizon, you may want to give yourself a slightly lower withdrawal rate. But one piece that is not a part of the math that you have to consider, if you're retiring early, let's say 45, 50, 55, okay, you still have something that a 70-year-old probably doesn't have, or you have more of it, and that's human capital. You might want to take on projects. You might want to do something that yields you an income, and then your backstop is going to be Social Security or that long-term, fixed income that you could get in the U.S. That's Social Security. So that's a wonderful question. If you have a longer time horizon, you may have to think about it a little bit differently, and then that sequence of return risk, might have something to do with it as well. Like as soon as you retire, is the market in a big decline for years, or is the market, on fire for years after that, and now you're way ahead of the game? I kind of feel like I'm way ahead of the game because now my portfolio has nearly doubled, and I'm 6 years into retirement. I'm about, less than 10 years from possibly taking Social Security. So those are all things you want to think through as you're looking at that. But I love the 4% rule as a starting point.
Yeah, I think the other thing, too, about the 4% rule that people need to keep in mind is you're not locked into 4%. I mean, you can change your behavior if you need to, right? I think people have that perception, but we're dynamic, right? We adjust our spending and our income levels as we need to. So something to keep in mind there, Michael. Let's move to another question here. This one's coming from Tasha. Tasha wants to know, how will you teach your kids about money as they will be brought up differently than you were?
Oh, gosh, this has been a big one. My daughter is an adult at this point. And for me, as I was learning all this stuff about money and personal finance and investing, the number one thing I wanted to do was to teach it to my daughter. So I did. I wrote a book called Money Letters to My Daughter to try to share a lot of the basic things, mostly around, credit and debt and managing your money and things like that. I think it's critical to pass it on. So I had mentioned that I just never wanted my daughter to know poverty the way that I did. I've accomplished that. She's had a great life. But on the flip side of that, I didn't want her to be spoiled or feel entitled and not appreciate the value of a dollar. So being a parent, especially a single parent, is one of the hardest jobs in the world. So I have tried to balance that. And, sometimes I've done a good job, sometimes not so great, where I wish I would have done something different. But it is a constant challenge. Now that she's an adult, it's kind of neat to see the fruits of my labor. Some of it stuck, some of it didn't.
That's always the case, right? You can't win them all, though, right?
That's right. That's right.
Okay, we got another question here coming from Cal, and Cal wants to know, is it possible that FIRE might not be the best strategy for some people? Interesting question.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. No one strategy is right for everyone. He's absolutely right. Now, I think the first part, the financial independence, is something that pretty much everyone would want. Who would not want to be not dependent on a job and able to create their own paycheck, or to, create a nest egg where they can live off of that if they want to. FIRE gives you choices, it gives you options, and it allows you to move closer towards your goal, perhaps a lot quicker. Now, the superpower, Rob, is that if you do love your job and you don't want the retire early part, that's amazing. But the truth of the matter is most people don't love their job. But if you do, that is totally a superpower, because if you reach financial independence, you've created the option to retire if you want to. So now you have choices.
Right. You've got the money to walk away if something about your situation doesn't change, right? Do you think, just to kind of follow up on that, do you think that there's a certain mentality or a type of personality that is best suited to FIRE?
I think that there is. I actually think that there is. I think it's someone that's curious and wants to act on that curiosity, because you do have to, there's a learning process. There's some knowledge and education that you have to be willing to get. I think you have to be a long-term thinker, because this stuff does not happen overnight. A lot of people might think, oh, it's the tech engineers and the gurus and all that. It's not just them. I'm not a tech person. I'm not in engineering or anything like that. But I do think there are certain characteristics that will help you get there. It's not just that you're a saver or you're a high income earner, because you need to be able to put all those things together to make it work.
I'm also not a computer person, Jackie. My solution to all computer problems is just unplug it and plug it back in. If that doesn't work, start hitting it a couple times. And if that doesn't work, get a new computer. I don't know. Anyway, that's just me.
Yeah.
In any case, thanks so much for taking some of those questions. We're going to have to leave it there. We're all out of time. We'll have to have you back on again, because I got 1,000,001 more questions to ask you, and I'm sure our audience does too. But we really appreciate you taking the time to join us this time.
Oh, this was so awesome. And I appreciate you having me on here. This was so much fun.
Well, again, like I say, we'll have to have you back. Fantastic story. Check out more about Jackie if you're interested in her story here. For those in our audience, thank you for tuning in as well, too. Quick programming note for you here. We're on summer hiatus for the first 2 weeks of August, but we're back with a fantastic episode on August 21st. Financial influencer Ange Matthews is going to explain why 10 stocks can be all you need to be financially and ethically satisfied as an investor. She's going to share her approach to building that portfolio. That's all the time we have for this episode. However, though, from everyone at Inside Investing, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you all next time.
Have more questions? Check out the links to the right and in the description below.